Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
So when you do your experiment and he is operating and the novice is operating on this music, I mean, there's just going to be a difference.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Dr. Thomas Dunn, professor of educational psychology at the University of Toledo. Father Bacik and Dr. Dunn will discuss becoming an expert through discipline. And now, here is Father Bacik.
Tom, I think one of the reasons I enjoy speaking with you is that you come at things from a different perspective than I do. First of all, you're a psychologist while I'm a theologian, and you have often a little different intellectual framework in viewing things, and I find that enriching. It's awfully easy for us to talk with people who simply agree with us or in our field or happen to be in the same mindset or persuasion that we are. And that makes for easy conversation very often. But I think it's more challenging and enriching at times to talk with people who perhaps at least start out with a different kind of mental set or conceptual framework. And maybe that's one of the reasons that I do find that not only enjoyable but fruitful talking with you. And so I want to begin again with something from my own work as a theologian and as a pastor, as a spiritual director and so on. And that is the general notion that things are supposed to come easily to us in the spiritual life. In a way, as Christian people, we're always supposed to be trying to improve ourselves, supposed to become better Christians. My mentor, Karl Rahner, has a saying that I am a Christian in order to become one, meaning that that's a statement of ideals, but that one doesn't really live up to it, that there's a progress. We have a lot of, in theology these days, a lot of journey imagery, that life is a journey, and that we're trying to move forward and figure out how we can walk with the Lord on that journey. So there's a whole lot of evolutionary, developmental sense in theology these days. Well, we begin talking like that, and a lot of times the problem is that people expect instant results. That someone decides they want to pray, and they think they're going to become a great prayer after a week's time or so. Or we have people who want to learn something about theology, and they think if they go to a 6 weeks course that they're going to have that mastered in a way or know this field of theology. Or someone has a fault, they gossip too much, and they expect to be able to get over it immediately. So I would say in general, in my area at least, in this developmental framework, we find this utopian notion that one is going to move ahead quickly or make progress easily without any effort or discipline. And maybe that's sort of a starting point for us talking here about, from your perspective, how you would begin to look at that as I describe my field to you.
Okay. Yeah, well, from several perspectives, I've had, in some of my work, I've had similar examples. I might work with some people on teaching them some relaxation strategies, for example. And then I'll ask them, well, how'd you do on that? Well, I tried it, and it didn't work. And I said, well, what do you mean it didn't work? I said, well, last week I tried it once.
And it didn't work.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm sure we can all point to examples of that. Certainly teachers can see that. Classic examples of their students hoping that, well, if they read this stuff once, or if they solve one example, that they're going to be expert at it.
Yeah.
And of course, in psychology, we often joke about certain things, that we do research on things that your grandmother knows. And so I can say, well, your grandmother knows already that you can't learn anything really well by doing it once.
Yes.
So
you see, in your own work, you see that same kind of problem. I wonder if the culture that we live in doesn't intensify that, where we have sort of instant gratification very often for our longings or needs, or we see people on television who make it easily or quickly. I wonder if the rock musicians don't have something to do with that, of a group exploding on the scene, and seemingly without having spent many years in study or in preparation for that. And, I mean, that might be a false perception. I really don't know. Maybe indeed they did spend a lot of time preparing for their big moment. But, I mean, there's this sense of a meteoric rise and sudden instant fame. And I think maybe the culture plays into this problem here, saying, well, I don't really need to try, or I don't really have to discipline myself to make this progress.
Well, I think we went away from that ethic in the last couple of decades, and I'm sure that there were examples of rock performers who may not have been that good, but had a good show. And, they did lots of explosions, and they dressed up really crazily. But on the other hand, I'll bet you some of the best rock performers are those, and the ones who have longevity, are those who studied for years and years and years.
Yeah, and prepared themselves for their big breakthrough.
Exactly, right. And they may not appear to be that way, but they're probably experts at what they do. At least we would hope they are.
Yes. I was thinking, too, of another phenomenon along this line, the sense that I shouldn't have to try this hard. I remember in marriage counseling that will come up a lot. I'd say, well, you two people, you have to really try to communicate. You have to practice at this and work at this. And one of the other partners will say, but that's not right. You're not supposed to have to work at it. If you love one another, to flow. Right. I expect it to be more spontaneous than. In fact, if you have to work that hard at it, it isn't worth it. It would tarnish whatever is involved here. It would somehow reduce the value of this if I knew my spouse was really programmed into doing this particular good behavior and was following out a discipline in doing it. I think that, and maybe that's played out in some other ways, too. I can't in trouble put my finger on it, but it's some sort of notion that I should be better than this. I shouldn't have to discipline myself. This ought to come easily. Maybe that's almost a prideful statement in a way. I don't know. Are you recognizing what I'm talking about there?
I think so. I know there are other examples, classic examples, that writers, for example, the popular notion of the writer is somebody who sits and gets these terrific ideas and then sits down and writes. But if you talk to the writer will tell you that every morning I go in there and it's a struggle, and sometimes the words don't come out. And what happens, of course, is the only way that person gets good is by doing it. Yeah, and practice.
I was thinking of a counter-example in something like the movie Amadeus, the way it portrayed Mozart. And it seems to me that there you had an example of what we'd call genius, I suppose, where Mozart seemed to be simply a vehicle for the spirit, and things came full-blown to him. And I suppose Salieri had a lot of his problems precisely because he's in there working hard and trying to produce this stuff.
He doesn't have to work at it.
That's right, and here's this young fellow who doesn't seem to be too together in other aspects of his life, but musically, it just flows. It just comes out. Well, anyway, maybe the encounter with genius like that...
It's a false impression.
Yes,
exactly.
Of how life really is.
And in fact, interesting you say that, there was a famous study done comparing expert and novice chess players over 20 years ago. And essentially, the study was a very cute one. When you say cute, it's interesting. They had these master chess players and regular chess players. Master chess players are those, I think, have played 50,000 hours, and they've reached some level. I'm not a chess player, but these are very good people. And what they did had a series of slides, and they showed the slides for just a few seconds to each person. And the slides would depict a chessboard with the pieces arranged all over the place and often in patterns. Well, the chess masters could recreate. After just seeing a few seconds, they could recreate the whole board, whereas the novices couldn't do that. And the interesting thing is they found that the chess masters and the novices were of equal intelligence. And so it really led them to believe, among other things, is that what really accounted for excellence there was not that these chess masters were geniuses or had better problem-solving strategies, literally, because they had played more chess.
Yes,
And so that started thinking and started quite a bit of work on the study of expertise. And one of the primary outgrowths of that is that people who are really good at doing something are not good at it because you just have better general problem-solving skills or have a higher IQ. They're good at something because they do it more often. I mean, it sounds...
It's simple and down to earth as that.
Exactly.
The genius moves out of that category, I guess, in a sense. I mean, the Mozart example, if that's really...
Yeah, how many Mozarts do we have?
That's right,
So,
yeah.
Right.
There's a few geniuses, but there's
But
a
then
lot
again,
of
Mozart
people...
spent most of his day writing music anyway.
Yeah,
so he
did get
quite
a lot
often.
of practice, yeah.
That's right.
But he was able to do it with great facility. But so what you're saying is that we have few geniuses, but we have a lot of experts, people who do a particular thing quite well.
Right,
and the
really
variable, and what you're
do.
telling me is the real variable is that they practice at it,
That's right.
they work at it, that there's a discipline involved.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I remember doing a study comparing expert and novice choral sight reading and music. And I had a group of people who taught music, conductors and choral directors in the community, this community, and then I had other groups of students who were more novice at music, although they knew music quite well, as it turns out. And I gave them a new piece of music to read that they hadn't read before, and I said, okay, how would you deal with this music if you're going to read it for the first time? And one of the professors who was an expert, one of the experts, said, well, I do this all the time. And on one side of his desk he had 50 pieces of music, and he took my piece of music, placed it right on top, and then said, I'll do it. And he took the 51st, which was mine, and went through it. It was very elegant. He went through, and within 30 seconds he knew where the piece came from in terms of time, what period it was. He knew how all the parts would sound. There were 5 different parts to it. He knew how they would sound together. He knew which of many of the groups he conducted would be able to sing it best, what he would use it for. He did all this in 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. So after we were talking, there was certainly an elegance to this. And I said, well, how often do you do this? He says, well, I've been teaching music for 25 years, and he says, that stack of music is what I have to do this month. So essentially, he does that 50 times a month. He takes a new piece of music and processes it 50 times. I don't know if you want to multiply 50 times 12 times 25, we are talking thousands and thousands of times that he has read a new piece of music and processed it.
So when you do your experiment and he is operating and the novice is operating on this music, I mean, there's just going to be a difference. And it's simply because he's attuned to that and is used to it, and his perceptual apparatus is in sync with what's going on.
Exactly. He can automaticity is the term we use. I mean, he does things automatically. What the expert can do, because they've done things so often, as part of the environment they can release to automatic processing. Then they can pay more attention to subtle things that the novice can't do at all. And that's really why they're so different, even if they have the same IQ.
Interesting. You know, Tom, in the field of moral theology these days, we're doing a lot more talk about virtue. It's a renaissance of the Middle Age notion that Aquinas used, and it goes all the way back to Aristotle. That when Socrates is looking for a just man, for what justice is, searching out what justice is, they say, well, let's look for a just man. And then you see a person practices that virtue easily. Then you begin to know what justice is. Well, that whole notion of virtue has been throughout the history of moral theology, but it's getting resurrected these days. And there's a whole lot of emphasis on learning proper behavior, in this case Christian behavior, so that it becomes second nature to one, which is what a definition of virtue would be, something that's second nature. It just flows easily, that one does it without much thought. It does it without worrying about things. It just happens, and there's a pleasure connected with it. That one gets a certain satisfaction because one does it with facility and ease, and a certain delight comes over one. And I think that connects in with what you're talking about. We can almost say, apply all of that to the quest for sainthood. The part of the quest for sainthood is to be able, and again in a Christian frame, is to follow Christ, to put on the mind of Christ, to be able to see the world sort of automatically the way he sees it. and respond to the world in the way he did.
Right.
And to do that without gritting your teeth and without a great deal of thought, but it simply flows out of one, because that's become one's mindset, one's general approach to life. You can almost say that the saints are experts in the spiritual life, or that they are people who have disciplined themselves and trained themselves so that they respond rather automatically to the stimulus in the culture. I almost hate to use this kind of word, like I'm betraying within, but I'm trying to talk your language, and if I do, I mean, it comes out almost stimulus-response kind of language, but that's sort of it, that when you encounter a poor person, you would automatically be compassionate because you've put on the mind of Jesus Christ.
I've never thought of that kind of relationship. Certainly as a psychologist, I'm looking at skill acquisition and expertise in many domains. But if I can ask you a question in the parallel, obviously, as you say, to get expert at skill, you do a lot. You do a lot. You overlearn it, space it out over years. I'm kind of curious as to how one would create circumstances for the parallel training in virtue.
For the virtues, yeah. I think, first of all, if I was to sort of analyze the overall situation, I would say that what becomes important is to see someone else who is expert, to be able to see other people who live out that particular virtue, so that you get a general feel for it and a sense of how one operates along that line. So a youngster growing up in a family sees that his father is responsible. He sees his father gets up and goes to work every day, and sometimes when he doesn't feel well, he gets up and goes to work anyway. And he does a good job at work, and he takes pride in his work. And so the youngster begins to see that. So, I mean, you have to put people in an environment where they can see virtuous behavior actually going on. Then I think the next step you would have to do is to help people uncover the obstacles to living that way. What gets in your way of doing that? I mean, why can't you be responsible? You know, because, well, you just are unable to get your mind off your own needs. You say you always think of your own needs. So then we'd have to help people to cut through that. Then I think we would need to get people into situations where they can behave responsibly and find out that that works well. So if you can get a student to start a paper early in the quarter and to do the background work and to write the paper early on, then they begin to get a feel, well, this feels good. I mean, I'm not under the same pressures I was under before, and this paper is better than the ones I used to write at the last minute at the end of the quarter, and so on. So then you get a sort of, I don't want to get into the thing of saying virtue is its own reward, but it does have that flavor. That a lot of times one feels good because one has acted in a virtuous way. I'm not sure it's a good answer to your question, Tom, but it's some of the elements that would come in.
It's interesting because in skill areas, there's a long parallel with the research on comparing experts and novices. People are looking at how do you actually enhance expertise.
Okay, well, let's hear from you, Phil, how you would go about
it.
Well,
we're not really quite sure how to do this yet.
Okay.
But one of the issues that seems to come about is people learn knowledge in an academic setting where they actually gain the expertise out there in the world. Like the doctor gets really expert at what he does, not in medical school, but out there working.
Okay.
The teacher doesn't become an expert in the teacher education, but out there in the classroom.
Right.
And a musician, not in the school of music, but actually playing. But there seems to be a need for some force or some person that serves as a guide to the person who gets out of the professional program, who guides the person towards expertise. And in a sense, you were almost suggesting that
it's quite a parallel. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is a person who could be a coach, a mentor, an apprenticeship type of arrangement, and these already exist. But now people are looking at that more closely in terms of the more formal ways of guiding that person, essentially trying to do this. If it takes that expert I told you about to read 20,000 pieces of music before he's an expert, with maybe better coaching and mentoring and guidance, maybe only has to read 10,000.
Yeah.
So it's still a lot of time and a lot of practice, but you might be able to guide the person there. So the
role... the psychologist, and in your field, you're looking for ways to facilitate that process.
Exactly.
But the dynamics are the same. You are learning from an expert in one
yes,
way or another.
And that person serves as a model, just as you the same. Just as you the same.
Now, this goes for anything. I mean, this goes for being a mother. I mean, the young girl growing up in the family probably learns a whole lot about mothering from observing her own mother.
Well, I can just use the example of my sister when she had her first child, and my mother. We had 5 in the family. And my sister asked my mother to come out to California. Can you help me out here for a while? And my sister said, I don't understand it. How did you do that? Because my mother had 5 children. She was an expert at what she was doing. And my sister said, wow, look at all that going on. Yes, we all have some areas of expertise. And there's also a certain, when you said virtue is its own reward, expertise, there's a certain elegance about expertise which rewards the practitioner.
I know you used that word elegance before. Why don't you say a little bit more about that?
Well, we've all had the experience, maybe we call it a peak experience, when we've really done something well. Athletes have that. But no matter what, I mean, if you are a good cook, you know there's a certain time where you did it really well. Yeah. You put those ingredients together, and boy, that cake or whatever it is you've done as best, better than anyone else could do it. You know it, and you found an elegance to it all. Yeah. The teacher has that experience when things go well. The taxi driver who negotiates a difficult route through traffic is applying very high level of expertise and elegance and feels good about it, almost like a peak experience. So in a way,
that's comparable to my statement.
Exactly. You know, I mean, you probably have some philosophical discussions about, as you approach expertise, and it is overlapping with virtue to a certain extent.
Okay, so we're talking about the expert vis-a-vis the novice at one point, and we're trying to see what makes an expert. And so we saw that they have to have a certain facility for the task. I mean, you're not going to make a great ball player out of somebody whose eyesight is very poor, for
example. They have a good foundation of basic skills, otherwise they're not going to get there.
That's right. But then, once you've gotten that much, then it is often hard work and discipline that makes the difference.
Sure, the people who go around the country, expert musicians, and if you interview them, they practice 6 hours a day. There's some famous research that was done on Olympic swimmers. Kids between the ages of 13 and 17 swim 6 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Yeah, I saw that. That's remarkable,
Of course, it prevents them from doing that. It keeps them off the streets, too.
Yeah, well, you can always get caught up in sort of a one-dimensional development, and when you get so zeroed in on one thing.
In fact, that was one of the problems they found, that they were so intense about that the social development was lagging.
Yeah. Now, into this mix then comes the question of discipline, right? That we began by talking about people who expected things to happen easily, and we have to resurrect that old notion of discipline. Again, within my Christian framework and theological background, we always talked about asceticism. Asceticism was part of the growth in the spiritual life. You had to purposefully deny yourself certain things in order to be able to make progress. You had to keep your senses under control and train your imagination to work in positive ways if you were going to move forward to becoming a holy person, a better person. So I suspect we're going to find parallels there again, Tom.
Definitely. And in the beginning of learning some skill, it's always arduous. You have to set aside time. As a psychologist, we would say you have to go for long-term gratification instead of short-term gratification. Grit your teeth, work hard, and then it gets easier to work hard. You still work hard, you still put in the time, but it gets easier and you like it. So oftentimes we made a mistake. We view people who are good piano players, for example, And if you interview a student in the School of Music, and he's maybe 20 years of age, and they play the piano very well, but they've been playing for 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years, hours a day. They love it now. But they perhaps didn't love it when they were playing.
And it brings a delight.
Exactly.
A delight, and you enjoy the activity itself.
So just as what you were saying, acting virtuously is not as big a problem after you've done it for a while.
Right.
And it flows, I guess.
You almost have to sell this idea then, don't you? I mean, if we're going to, as people are moving along, you have to keep reinforcing this idea that hard work is part of this. I remember a student coming to me one time who wanted to be a professor, and so on. He wanted to be able to get up and lecture and so on. And he wanted to know sort of how I did that. I got ready. I brought him in my room and I showed him books of mine, that tomes and volumes where in every paragraph I had written in the margins my summary of it, just page after page. And I just showed him that. And it was almost like the biblical story. He went away sad. It was. I think I overdid it, but I mean,
have to do all that.
That's right. And he even dropped out of my course. And it was like he had his high ideals and wanted to do that, but the thought of that much disciplined work was just more than he could abide. I think that maybe there were gentler ways of doing that, and maybe we need to find a ways to encourage people to do their discipline and to keep working at things.
Yeah.
You need encouragement. Maybe you need rewards for short-term progress.
Precisely. Yes, and in fact, we talked about this before. It makes us worry about a situation or a school situation which does not promote the ability of students to defer gratification. In other words, hey, you may have to read this chapter tonight. You may have to do some difficult homework. But the way you get good at anything is by doing it.
Right.
And so the risk is if we don't actually expect or have high expectations on the part of students in school, that they may never learn to put off immediate gratification, to knuckle down and do the hard work now. And if they never do that, then it's going to be very difficult to develop expertise in any knowledge area.
And that's a good point, and one that I might try to close on here is that if we can learn this in one area, it may have carryover. In other words, somebody who would study music and become very good at it may have a good feel for what it means to talk about Christian virtues then. This discipline, and so something becomes second nature and it flows easily. So, Tom, I want to thank you for being on the program, and I think maybe we have illuminated some of these areas. At least I hope so.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Dr. Thomas Dunn, professor of educational psychology at the University of Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was becoming an expert through discipline. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Minister, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio, 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.